son-in-law, Dewayne Bryant. He's smarter than anybody around that I know. He has more hours on the master's level, in theology than I have in an undergraduate course at Oklahoma Christian. And he has his PhD in addition to that. He is one of the most brilliant young men that I know. He has been to Egypt, archaeological dig, found gold. He is a man who cares about people, who is now teaching at Faulkner University. We're thankful for that. That's given him an opportunity to do what he has trained his entire life for, and that is to teach college. He is knowledgeable about Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and Sumerian, and even Egyptian hieroglyphs. Ricky was once a member of Concord Road, and he's been way here and there. Brilliant. He is not only the husband of my firstborn daughter, but the father of 5 of my beautiful granddaughters. And I really appreciate all of him, but he is one of the most intelligent men that I've ever known. And when I have questions dealing with the Old Testament, his area of expertise is ancient Near Eastern history, and many, many, many abilities. So when it's Old Testament stuff, I ask him, and when it's New Testament stuff, he asks me. But he is, I didn't have any sons, but I count him.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started then. It's wonderful to get to be here with you. It's my wife and I, our first time here at the Connect Conference, and appreciate my father-in-law always. He's better than any PR man money could buy. So that's awesome. And I've got a couple of my high school teachers in attendance. So it's humbling to get to come back to Nashville. We've been all over the world since I think 2010, and to get to come back and see some very familiar faces, it's a wonderful thing. So appreciate everyone being here to learn how to defend the faith without being a jerk. I gave this title to Alan Stevens almost as kind of a joke, and it stuck. And I think I told a couple of people that he called me about a month ago and wanted to make sure I was going to go with this title, and I said, sure. I mean, everybody wants to be edgy, right? And so this is the thing. But there's actually a story behind this. Why I titled it this, and it was I was reading in this book. It was an apologetics book, and in the introduction, someone had written, and I looked for it. I could not find it, or else I would recommend it to you. This person told a story about an exchange between someone who was a Christian and a friend who was not. They went to this event where there was a Christian apologist speaking, and the fellow, the way it was being described, I just kind of stood up there and gave answers and did his thing. But at the very end of it, as these two individuals were walking out, the one who was the Christian turned to his friend and said, did you get some stuff that was satisfying to you? Because apparently this person, not being a believer, had gone and apparently had gotten some things that had satisfied their questions. So the speaker had met this person's objections or answered their questions to their satisfaction. And when it was all said and done, the response of the person was, yeah, but that guy was still a jerk. So because this person was a jerk, all of a sudden everything that he said is thrown out the window and has been invalidated, right? And there are ways that people who want to, who are well-meaning, want to defend the faith, but they use tactics that aren't really great. And so one of those is you take a bunch of evidence and you just steamroll the person with it so that they have no objections whatsoever. You don't leave them a chance to breathe, a chance to ask any questions, and you just gallop all over them, right? Or If you get really sort of backed into a corner, you overstate the case a little too much, and then you can't really back that up, and you don't really have the evidence to defend the assertions that you've made, and so you've overstated things. Some people go right to the big guns, right? Well, you got to do this, you're going to go to hell, right? And so you try to scare them into Christianity. And so all of these things, they just really don't work because in the moment, and you may have done this, right? When somebody has had a conversation with you and has opposed something that you believe or contradicted something that you believe, you go back and what do? You think about it, right? You think about it, and then you realize, oh, well, this is where this person made this mistake, and this is where the person overstated the case, or they might not have been totally honest with me there, and you think about these things, and then at the very end of the day, after you've got this all sort of rolled around, you think, oh, well, this person just wasn't. Christians are supposed to be good people, right? Christians are supposed to be honest people. This didn't sound very honest, right? And so those are the kinds of things that you see, the kind of things that people see in the various tactics that folks use inappropriately. Now, what I'd like to do in our time together is look at 3 particular Bible verses and then one sort of practical point at the end that's going to wrap everything up. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken 3 different passages, and we're going to dig into each one, and it's from all over the spectrum. And what I mean by that is you've got those people who think that, well, I'm going to specialize in philosophy and evidence and rational argument, and I'm going to be able to argue somebody into the kingdom. And that's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is, oh, well, we just need to love everybody. And as long as we are good and generous and kind and loving, then people will magically, intuitively know that they need to be Christians and know what to do by our example, right? And so you have this spectrum of people. And what we really want to do is kind of pick from everything, because we really need to have a balanced approach, okay? So the first thing we're going to look at is Jude 3, and it just says, "Beloved, although I was eager to write to you about our common salvation, I found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints." And of course, everybody practically knows this, right? If you look up an online Bible, it's like 4 million people have underlined this verse, digitally. And so everybody knows this, right? Contend for the faith. And when we think of a Jude here, he says, I was eager to write to you about our common salvation. This really neat topic, but I found it necessary to write appealing to you for this other reason. And whatever that was, I'm not sure we're entirely sure what it was that he was saying for his audience to contend with or contend against, but this was something that took precedence over whatever it was that he had chosen to write about, and he thought it was more important to write about this instead. So when we talk about contending for the faith, we think, well, what does this mean? What does it mean to contend? And for some people, it's to fight, right? That's to engage in some kind of struggle or conflict. And the word really is sort of connected to Greek athletic contests. And so you think about how seriously some people take sports. Dial that up to about 11. And that's kind of how Greek culture looked at athletics. We think people go nuts over sports in America, or soccer in Europe or South America, but for Greek culture, it was absolutely fanaticism almost. And so there weren't second or third place at the Olympics. There weren't second and third place anywhere. It was the winner and then all of the losers. And you wanted to be the winner because that meant basically eternal glory for you. You'd have your name remembered in the history books. If you were at an Olympiad, that year would be known by your name. You would be connected to the closest thing to immortality that you could get. And so people were really, really intensely invested in this. And this is the kind of language that Jude uses. It has that sort of in the background of this desire, this intense interest to achieve a goal. In fact, we could say, this is how one commentator put it, to exert oneself without distraction to attain a goal. People who were in athletics in the ancient world, they were just like today. They watched what they ate. They had certain behaviors they did or did not engage in, had training regimens. It was very serious, just as much as anything you'd find today. And so this is the language that he's saying is when you contend for the faith, it's like that. It's like that kind of struggle with those kinds of stakes when you are going out to spread the gospel of Christ. Now, as far as defending the faith, it could sound very, I'll say, bellicose, right? Sound like it's the language of conflict. And when you think contend or contending or fighting, I'm a child of the 80s, and so this is one image that sort of comes to mind. You know, Predator or Commando or, anything with Sylvester Stallone, right? Just manly men going out, hope against hope, and of course they win in the end, in spite of all of the odds. But if you wanted to get slightly, I guess, closer to the original, you might think of something like this, right? Everybody likes this sort of romanticized notion of the knight, right? And everything that a knight is, and the honor and the glory, and going out and winning in service of his Lord. But it's really more like this. Okay, this is the arena of conflict for contending for the faith. Discussions, words, right? Engagements, social engagements. These are the kinds of things that we're really, really talking about. One example, I think, that really sort of illustrates some of this that I'd like to use is, you may be familiar with Penn Jillette, very famous magician, part of Penn and Teller, the Penn and Teller duo. Of course, you may know he is a very famous atheist, right? He is unapologetic about his unbelief. And I saw a video that he put out, and it was kind of strange. But in this video, he was sort of disheveled. I think it was late at night. He was, after a show or something. He was putting this video together and just putting it out on the internet. And it was, I guess, about 5 minutes long. You can Google it. Something like Penn Jillette was given a Bible, something like that. And so he tells this story about after a show that he had. This fellow was sort of hanging around. And he's like, oh, okay, one of the groupies, right? And so he goes up and he meets this guy, and the fellow hands him a Bible. And I think he said he'd even written in it or written a note in it. He was very kind, very complimentary of the show. A big fan. He really enjoyed this, and they stood around and they talked for a few minutes. And what was really interesting about this was, this guy wasn't some crackerjack evangelist. He wasn't some stealth apologist. He was just a good, genuine person. And so when Jillette was describing his encounter with this guy, now he's a very, very intelligent man, highly intelligent, usually very, very articulate in how when he speaks, interviews or going on shows or things like that. He almost seemed like he was at a loss for words. The one thing that he kept saying over and over again, this was a good man. This was a good man. And of course, atheist had, and he said, this will not convert me. This is not going to do anything for my spiritual beliefs. But he said, and is again almost at a loss for, this was a good man. And so what did he do? What did this guy do that had required any special training? We think about apologetics or Christian evidence as, that's for the people with PhDs in philosophy or, ancient history or some field of expertise that normal people, regular people don't have. He took some extra time, he was cordial, and he was genuine. And Penn Jillette's response went out to millions of people, and millions of people saw what one person with just a little bit of extra time, who was cordial, who was genuine, who was friendly, what they could do for a fellow who probably had somewhere to be, go back to his hotel room, turn in for the night, rest after a long day. And here he is making a video after all this, telling the world, this guy, this was a good man. In fact, I want to show you part of what he said here. This is what he said. I've always said that I don't respect people who don't proselytize. I don't respect that at all. If you believe there's a heaven and a hell and people could be going to hell or not getting eternal life, and you think that it's not really worth telling them this because it would make it socially awkward, which is frankly the reason why a lot of people don't do it, and atheists who think people shouldn't proselytize and who say just leave me alone and keep your religion to yourself, how much do you have to hate somebody not to proselytize? How much do you have to hate somebody to believe everlasting life is possible and not tell them that? I mean, if I believed, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that a truck was coming at you and you didn't believe that truck was bearing down on you, there's a certain point where I tackle you, and this is more important than that. This comes from a guy who was an avowed atheist who simply had an encounter with somebody who took a little bit of time to show him the love of Christ. And then he went out and put it on the entire, on the internet for the entire world to see. Now, this reminds you a little bit of what Paul does in Acts chapter 17. So if we just kind of keep this in mind, okay, take some extra time. He was cordial. He was genuine. Actually, if you go to John chapter 4, this actually describes Jesus and his encounter with the woman at the well, right? There's no reason why Jesus should have been talking to this person. But what is the chapter, and you probably know this, what does it say? He had to go through Samaria. He had to go through Samaria. He took some extra time. And so he goes up to this lady. She is probably socially undesirable. And what does he do? He's just friendly to her. And instead of, sinner, you adulteress, I think there was a famous clip of Charlton Heston saying that in a movie to someone's wife one time, adulteress. Instead of saying that, he just, and you can tell in their discussion, she keeps trying to like sidestep some of what Jesus says. So along this little jagged path, we get from, here's this strange Jewish man, to, I bet this guy's the Messiah. She goes and tells her entire village, and all of a sudden, it's almost like she's the world's first missionary. Jesus never had to say one thing about condemning her as a sinner, telling her she's going to hell, telling her how she's going to suffer the wrath of God. All he did was like this, and it changed her life, and hopefully her life and the lives of all the people in her village that ran out to meet him. Now, we also see this in Acts chapter 17. Okay, so Paul is going to go to the city of Athens. It's filled with trappings of idolatry. And what the text says, and this is from a guy who grew up in a town that was like a Roman colony. Okay, so he wasn't unfamiliar with idolatry. He grew up in a town that was probably filled with it. But it says, Acts 17:16, Paul was waiting for them in Athens, and his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. Now, this word usually means something that's negative. It has a positive use, but usually it's something that's negative. And you look at different translations, NIV says distressed, ESV, NASB is provoked, King James is stirred, a little on the weaker side, NRSV, deeply distressed. Okay, that sort of captures what's going on here. Paul was stirred up. He was provoked. There's something that was just put him, on high alert. Okay. Now, you go a little bit farther down that chapter. He goes to Mars Hill to speak with the Areopagites, and he keeps his emotions in check. He keeps his emotions in check. He is provoked. I mean, he's ready to go, but he keeps his emotions in check, and he begins with a historic greeting. Okay, this is something, now in all of this, Paul has sort of in the back of his mind ancient Greek speakers and ancient Greek writers. Okay? So he says, men of Athens. It kind of calls back to an ancient Greek rhetorician named Demosthenes, who had the similar address. So, men of Athens, Paul knows his audience. He then gives them a compliment. It's a standard compliment that you would use in rhetoric. And he says, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. So it's a complimentary statement. But then he says, there's something more that you lack, or there's a little bit more that you need. And so he talks about the altar to the unknown God and then presses his point home. And then that's where he gives this great lesson. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. Times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Okay, so he still gets the gospel message in there, starts out with a pleasant greeting, gives them a compliment, tells them where they're lacking, gives them the precise instructions on what they need to do to follow up in this. Now, Paul doesn't sugarcoat it, okay? Because when you look at this one part where it says, he doesn't live in temples made by man, or is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, I guess you could say this is a little bit of a dig at the Greco-Roman religion, because if you look at where Paul was, he's right here on the Areopagus. And generally, like the picture I showed a minute ago, that's facing this way, okay? So Paul's here, his audience is here, when he's speaking and saying, the real God doesn't live in a temple. The real God doesn't need to have a house. He doesn't need to be served by people like us. All they have to do is literally look over his shoulder, and there's the Acropolis with the Parthenon, with the Erechtheum, it had a temple to Poseidon up there at one point. And so you have all this, the center of the religious life of ancient Athens. Athens named after Athena, right? And so there's the religious center, and Paul still says, yeah, he's going to be pleasant. He's going to give them a compliment, but he's going to also say, yeah, but this ain't it. When he's speaking and giving them this lesson. And there it is, all for everyone to that's what he's talking about, right? Everyone sees this. Now, the thing is, everyone who is a genuine Christian is going to be distressed when we look at this world. There's a lot to be distressed about, right? Is your spirit provoked within you when you see the latest news story about some religiously motivated terrorist attack, right? Or an honor killing, or the grand opening of some new place of worship for some god that we know is a fictional deity that only exists in the minds of its worshipers. Yeah, that's upsetting, right? Because there are souls at stake, right? And so it is concerning, it is upsetting. And for some of us, we sort of get amped up a little bit, right? What do we do about this? I want to change the world. I want to go out there and I want everybody to be Christian, right? Of course, yes. I want everybody to be a Christian. But how do I do that? And that's where we have to say, you're not going to change the world for everyone. Jesus didn't do that. Paul didn't do that. There were people who disbelieved. There were people who doubted Jesus. Jesus, after he resurrected, there were some people who still doubted right, on the edge of him going up in the ascension. We're not going to change the world for everyone. But you can change the world for someone. Jesus did do that. Paul did do that. All of the biblical writers did do that. And Paul did it here at the Areopagus this day, because it says, Acts 17:34, some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. Paul did change the world for them. You and I aren't going to change the world for everybody, but you and I can change the world for somebody. Now, Paul, what if Paul had come in and he had just done what some well-meaning but misguided apologists do? Well, he could have said, hey man, you shouldn't believe on these Greco-Roman gods. All your gods are rapists. And yes, Greek mythology is filled with examples of male gods who just rape everything with reckless abandon. He could have said, your gods are disgusting. He didn't say that. He could have said, well, your mythological writings contradict each other. I mean, pick out any god and see how many origin stories that god has. They're all mutually exclusive. They contradict each other. Could have said that. Could have said, hey, next time you're at the Olympic Games, why don't you go look for the Palace of the Gods on top of Mount Olympus? It's right there. It's not hard to see it. Mount Olympus isn't a super tall mountain. You could look on the top and see there's nothing there. Where's the gate to the underworld? I mean, in the Greek myths, people go to the underworld like people in New Jersey go to Atlantic City. Everyone goes to the underworld. You've got Hercules, Theseus, Orpheus, all the other us's. They all go there for visits. Just show me one. Just show me one of these many portals that you've got to the underworld. Right? You could have give me some evidence. You could have said that. Paul didn't say that. He wasn't coming in with a bunch of criticisms. He did have a very positive message. Again, coming up with a very positive introduction, starting right out of the gate with a compliment. Even in his letters, if you go back and look at some of his letters, it could be like 1 Corinthians, where he is ready just to dial it up and let people have it. And what he will still say is, I thank my God for you. I thank the Lord Jesus Christ for you. Right, before he gets into the business. The next passage we're going to look at is 1 Peter 3:15-16. This is the one that's sort of the one that everyone thinks about. In your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. Well, the Greek word for making a defense, apologia, it's a courtroom term. It's used about 17 times in the New Testament, usually in a courtroom setting. And so it does not mean to apologize. And as many times as people say that, there are always some people, I don't know, sounds like you're trying to apologize for being a Christian. And no, that's not what it is. What it is a defense. It is a vigorous, well-informed defense of your position. And so it's just like going into court. You would never go into court. Hey, man, sorry I didn't look at your case. I didn't depose any witnesses. I don't even really know what's going on here. Tell you what, our strategy is going to be you just get up on the witness stand and look really pitiful. And we'll see if the jury takes pity on you. No, that's not how it works, right? A judge would not allow you to have a lawyer who was that incompetent. So what does that say about Christians? Shouldn't we be informed when we go to make a defense for why we have the hope of salvation, the hope of Christ, the hope that he's coming back, right? If we have that, we need to make a good case as to why we do have it. Living a good example is very important, but it's not enough. And this isn't the only passage that talks about that. So you've got like Matthew 28, right at the very end, the last few verses of Matthew's gospel. Jesus himself says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So make disciples, baptize them, teach them the true nature of obedience. People aren't going to be able to just magically intuit that by looking at how we behave. They can get some things, right? Don't get me wrong. They may see that you're a good parent, an obedient child. They see you care about other people. All of these are very important things that Christians should be doing. But they're not going to get the content of the gospel message unless we tell them. Now, Peter is talking to people who are suffering persecution. And so when he's talking to people here, they are practicing what is essentially an illegal religion. in ancient Rome, in the Roman Empire. So the difference is between a religio, or religion, a lawful religion, or a superstitio, which is an illegal religion. And we think superstition, we think, maybe I am a UT fan, so I guess in Alabama it's not so much the case. It's sort of shark-infested waters there, but here in Tennessee, I guess I can say this. UT fan. Maybe I've got this pair of socks that I wear I don't wash. Right, it's the superstition. The last time I wore this pair of socks, they won the national championship. Seeing as how that was over a quarter century ago, those are pretty rank by now. But you have these little superstitious things that you do, right? You don't cross a black cat's path. You don't walk under a ladder for multiple reasons. But you have these. That's not what a superstitio was. It was actually a dangerous thing, connected to black magic, and so this is the sort of the reputation of Christianity in the first century. In addition to all of the rumors that were spread about Christians. These people are cannibals. These people are incestuous. They call each other brother and sister, and they marry each other. Cannibals. They eat the body and drink the blood of some person. But Peter doesn't say, hey, stay quiet, go underground. We'll do some kind of guerrilla spiritual warfare here. He says, hey man, be ready to go out and make a case for why you have the hope that is in you. And so when you look at the passage, he says, always being prepared, anytime. There's no time limit on this. He says to anyone, it doesn't matter who. And of course, he's writing to people who are not trained apologists. These aren't specialists in philosophy or theology or anything like that. These are just people undergoing persecution. He says, you guys need to be ready. Be ready when this comes up, that you're able to make a case for Christ. Now, again, this was a very, very difficult time because Christians would be dressed up in animal skins, set out into the arena. You've got, of course, the infamous example of Nero using Christians to light his gardens at night as human torches and things like that. So Peter does not say, go underground. He says, you need to be ready to make a case for the hope that's in you. And that's why you are able to do that. Because it isn't just, I've just got this little bit of time of life, the slice of life on earth, and that's all you get, and I've got to make the most out of it. YOLO, right? You only live once. Go for the gusto. No, I can make a case, and if it kills me, if I die because of it, that person just sent me to meet my Lord. That's why anybody can do it, anywhere, anytime, to whom anyone that you find. Now, there is one last passage we'll look at here, and it's where Jesus says, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." There's a behavioral component to this as well, right? So loving one another, that's how people know that you're Christians. One of the biggest criticisms I see when I go on like atheist blogs and read atheist articles is, Christians, they have all this infighting. There's so many denominations and people can't get along with each other. And you've got these wackos, these people who think that they're prophets, and you've got all these other people who do these weird things, and they point out some of the things that they think are funny, and all of them fight, and they all can't get along. Well, the ideal is that, first of all, we have a knowledge of the truth. Truth should be unifying. And then we love each other. Now, in Leviticus 19:18, the law says, don't take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And Jesus mentions this in Luke 10, when a lawyer stands up to test him. And one of the things that he says is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Do this, or the man says it, he says, do this and you will live. But the guy says, who is my neighbor? So he tells him who his neighbor is by telling the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's not just it's not just your ethnic kinsman, right? It's not just somebody who looks like you or uses the same language or lives in the same country or has some kind of affinity with you. It's somebody who is as different as a Jewish person was from a Samaritan. These were mortal enemies. Some Jewish rabbis would say that if you were to murder a Samaritan, it wasn't like murdering a human being. It's exactly what the Nazis did. Jewish people aren't humans under German law. We can kill them without consequence. That was the relationship. And so Jesus brilliantly says, here's this guy. You may think he's your mortal enemy. He's actually your neighbor. Take care of him and love him. Julian the Apostate pointed this out. And Julian was the last pagan emperor of Rome. He was the nephew of Constantine. He was given a Christian upbringing and later rejected it. And he portrayed in his writings, he was very familiar with the Jewish writings. He was raised as a Christian. He was very familiar with Christianity. And he describes Christians as apostates from Judaism. He says they're atheists. They're godless Galileans. Godless because they didn't worship the gods of Rome. Galileans because Galilee wasn't really known for its intellectual achievements. And so it's sort of like, these are the dumb backwater people, right? And so he hated the fact that Christians were charitable. He said, in one writing, he says, they not only take care of their poor, but ours also. It's almost like it was a mark of shame that Christians were so charitable that they would take care of everybody. And so Julian went on this program to start a sort of a welfare program with temples, to do kind of the same thing. It was completely unacceptable to him to be outdone in love and charity by the Christians. Christians would bury people in catacombs, and it didn't matter if you were wealthy, poor, male, female, young, old, it didn't matter. You all got buried in the same place. That was not a thing for the Romans. Romans, your burial was stratified just like your society. You had your wealthy, maybe you're like your merchants, and your paupers, the slaves, and you were buried the same way. You were treated the same in death as you were in life. And it was very upsetting to see that Christians, when they bury people in the catacombs, it's everybody together. Why? Because everybody's made in the image of God. So why would you have these distinctions where some people are more valuable than others when God says all of you really are worth the same? Well, this is the kind of thing that this guy absolutely hated, and he was the last pagan emperor of Rome. Now, I'll have to speed up. This is the last couple of minutes we've got here. What I'd like to talk about are some verses that I think will help us as we start to think about shaping our mindset, about how we talk to other people. Social media, I think, has made us all professional jerks, right? Because you can communicate being a jerk in two languages, right? English and emojis, right? So, somebody says something and you disagree with it, so you put a laughing emoji to, show your sarcasm for it and all that kind of thing. So we've become really good at that kind of stuff. But being contentious is kind of at the center of so much of social media. And I think it's really the devil's greatest work. Because when you look at the things that the New Testament says to warn yourself against, it's the kinds of things that lead to contention, right? So, Galatians 5:19-21. Works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. If you do this, you're not going to inherit the kingdom of God. How many of these things are centered around anger, being contentious, fighting with somebody else? Several of them. What about the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. How many of these things diffuse that? Right? How many of these things diffuse anger and fighting and contention? Same thing for the Beatitudes, right? And I just pulled out a sample here. Poor in spirit, you've got to have some measure of humility there. Meekness, that's strength under control. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. You crave spiritual things more than physical things, material things. accolades and achievements. Being merciful. You're more eager to express God's grace than get revenge. Peacemakers, that's it. You don't even need to explain that, right? And so, being contentious is a temptation, right? Being a jerk is a temptation when somebody criticizes us or criticizes our beliefs. If you're on YouTube, if you've got a blog, you write a status update on Facebook. Somebody's going to come in, and it's some troll, and they're going to ruin your day in just a matter of a few words, right? Well, we can fall into that same temptation when we're engaging with people when we may not agree with what they think or what they say or what they believe or their perspective on Scripture. And being a jerk can be tied to ego, right? Because you look at some of these things that I mentioned just a minute ago, and it sort of centers on pride, getting my way, doing what I want, having what I think. And sometimes that can be a problem when you tie that in with evangelism, because you can say, well, this person's not a Christian. I want them to be a Christian. I need them to be a Christian. I'm validated as an evangelist or as an apologist or as just a follower of Christ if I can get this person to obey the gospel. Why are we doing that? That's a lot of first person pronoun, right? I need, I want, right? Are you trying to win them or are you trying to impress them? Because if you're trying to win them, that's for them. But if you're trying to impress them, then that's for you. Right? So if we take our ego out of the equation, we're going to go a long way to learning how to defend the faith without being a jerk. All right? Thanks so much.